It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. On Tuesday, British Prime Minister Theresa May met with her cabinet and called for an early election. Here's what she had to say.
I have just chaired a meeting of the cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election to be held on the 8th of June. Britain is leaving the European Union and there can be no turning back. And as we look to the future, the government has the right plan for negotiating our new relationship with Europe. We want a deep and special partnership between a strong and successful European Union and a United Kingdom that is free to chart its own way in the world. Our opponents believe, because the government's majority is so small, that our resolve will weaken and that they can force us to change course. They are wrong. They underestimate our determination to get the job done. And I am not prepared to let them endanger the security of millions of working people across the country. Because what they are doing jeopardizes the work we must do to prepare for Brexit at home, and it weakens the government's negotiating position in Europe.
Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn welcomed the idea and the decision to compete with her. Here's what he had to say.
I welcome the opportunity for us to put the case to the people of Britain to stand up against this government and its failed economic agenda, which has left our NHS in problems, which has left our schools underfunded, which has left so many people uncertain. We want to put a case out there for the people of Britain of a society that cares for all, an economy that works for all, and a Brexit that works for all.
On to talk about all of this with me is Leo Panitch. Leo Panitch is Professor Emeritus and Senior Scholar at York University in Toronto. He is the co-editor of the annual Socialist Register. The 2016 volume is called The Politics of the Right. Leo is also co-author of the UK Deutsche Book Prize for The Making of Global Capitalism, the Political Economy of American Empire. Leo, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sharmini.
So, Leo, Theresa May made her case for calling a snap election by saying that she couldn't execute on the people's decision as far as Brexit was concerned, primarily because Westminster is so divided. She's not getting the support she needs in order to carry out the exit negotiations with the European Union. What do you think is her motivation for calling for a snap election at this time?
Well, it's a reversal on what she previously said, and it's opportunistic. She's bearing in mind that Gordon Brown, when he replaced Tony Blair, also without an election, as she replaced Cameron without an election, he held back from calling one, even though he had a high degree of popularity in the months after he became prime minister, much higher than Blair had in the polls. But he dithered and waited. And in waiting, the result was that the government lost its popularity and lost the election. So I think she's looking at that. She's looking at polls that are showing the Tories upwards of some 17 to 20% ahead of the Labour Party in the polls. She may be looking over at Europe because with the rise this last couple of weeks of the Mélenchon candidacy for the presidency, with the sizable support that he is getting, and the prospect, in fact, that he may last into the second round to contend Le Pen, that may indicate to her that if she waits too long, the resentment in Britain against austerity and indeed against what a lot of what the European Union does represent in a negative sense for working people, even if it represents something positive in terms of the movement of labor and human rights. she may fear that she may come a cropper in the long run. On top of that, the Social Democrats are doing better in Germany. And she may have her eye on that as well. So it's fundamentally opportunistic. Although, of course, she's also looking to getting a large Tory majority, one, the fact that is backed by very right-wing Tory MPs, would allow her to try to get the kind of Brexit which is entirely focused on free capital mobility, on protecting the City of London, but is not focused on retaining within British law the positive elements that were adopted into British law in terms of rights of refugees, labor mobility, labor rights, human rights, and so on.
Now, Leo, the Labour Party might have been caught off guard because in theory, it was not expected till 2020 in terms of having to compete in an election for a prime minister here. Yet Jeremy Corbyn was very gracious and he welcomed the opportunity. How do you think he will fare in this election then?
Well, according to the opinion polls, he'll fare poorly, and that's why she's going now. That said, in the last few weeks, he has released a radical policy platform, by no means revolutionary, but radical in the sense of being highly critical of austerity, exposing the further cuts to the NHS, to the National Health Service, that is, promising a £10 minimum wage, and free school meals for children, all of which will be popular with Labour's constituency, even that constituency that voted for Brexit. So this was unleashed with a view to the local elections, the municipal elections to take place this May. This will be the grounds upon which they will run now on June 8th. And, you know, it may well be that if Corbyn saw that he was going to do poorly in the local elections, he might think that galvanizing Labour voters, because there's a much higher turnout around the national election, will give Labour a better chance with a higher turnout of regular Labour voters. And if he also felt that, you know, he was not making the breakthrough that another left-wing MP might make, because Corbyn is not the most charismatic of figures and isn't at all power hungry, he may feel that, well, maybe it's better to clear the deck and have someone else on the left succeed me after this election in order to continue the process of trying to turn the Labour Party into something it has not been for a long time, which is a mobilizing, educative, progressive force in British society.
Now, Leo, is there any chance that Brexit plans itself might get reversed in this process? Because we know that many people didn't turn out for the Brexit referendum, assuming that it wasn't going to succeed, but might be motivated to turn out this time around if a reversal was possible.
I think that's unlikely. I think the referendum actually had a higher turnout than recent British elections, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, I don't think there'll be that type of a swing. Labour itself, remember, accepted the referendum's outcome while saying that they did not want the type of Brexit that harmed working people, that stopped the rights of refugees, that allowed for capital mobility without labor mobility, etc. And I think they are honorable in doing that. But they did not come out against the outcome of the referendum. You know, that has disappointed a lot of people, especially in London, who are internationalists, etc. And it's conceivable that a good number of Labour voters who voted to remain could in London vote for the Liberal Democrats or possibly the Greens. I don't think there'll be enough of that to take away very many Labour seats, but you never know.
Leo, now put this in the context of what else is going on in Europe. We know that in France, there's also a presidential election underway in the next few weeks, and there are other shifts coming about as well. Give us the context here.
Yeah, I think that this is really, really significant. What is happening now, by virtue of this opportunistic move by May, is that there are going to be elections between next week and the fall in September in the three largest and most powerful European countries, France, Britain, and then Germany in the fall. May have had an eye, she may have had an eye to what's been happening in France in recent weeks, where the delegitimation of the mainstream center-left and center-right parties is so evident. Those parties who embedded themselves in the neoliberal state, in the neoliberal process of globalization that was ushered in not only through the American state, but through the European Union. And she may have had an eye to the growth and popularity of not only Le Pen on the right, but especially Mélenchon on the left. And she also may have had an eye to the fact that the Social Democrats are doing much better in Germany in the polls as against the conservatives, the Christian Democrats. So she may have figured, I better move while the iron is hot. And I think one needs in that sense to keep one's eye open, just as with Trump and Sanders in the American election. The delegitimation of those parties that associated themselves with neoliberalism, which in Britain means both the Labour Party before Corbyn, as well as the Tories, may play itself out in interesting ways, even in this British election. The vote for Brexit was partly on the part of Labour's, traditional Labour supporters, a vote against neoliberalism, although it was, of course, mixed up with the strong appeal of xenophobic right-wing elements to Labour's class interests. But you know, it's going to be a very, very interesting spring and summer that we are going to have, and it's going to tell us a lot about what the balance of forces is in Europe this year.
Leo, the Labour Party could also use this opportunity, of course, to build itself, like in the United States and our revolution attached to Bernie Sanders. There's a similar movement in the UK called Momentum, who is doing some very local organizing and building a movement behind Corbyn. Where is that at, and is this an opportunity for it to generate itself?
Well, one hopes so. The difficulty with election campaigns is they draw people into the immediate short-term task of getting out the vote, when what's needed to transform a party like the Labour Party, heaven knows, like the Democratic Party of the United States, is a much more fundamental change in the branches of the party, where they're not only electoral machines, not only get out the vote machines, which people are cynical about, but are actually active centers of working class life, relating to working class people's experiences, and making themselves centers of education and support on a day-to-day basis. The short-term effect of the election will be to divert attention from what Momentum hopes to do in that respect. But in the longer term, even if Labour does poorly in this election and comes out with fewer members of parliament than it now has, it's likely to retain more of the left-wing members of parliament who have a stronger base in the party, in the working class. And therefore, coming out of this election, even with fewer MPs, the chances would be greater for renewing the party on a long-term basis. And, you know, I think if we're honest with ourselves, although it's very important to stop this new right, it's also very important not to have a short-term perspective. We need to create the type of political institution which, you know, go beyond the terrible alternatives we've been offered by the Tweedledee and Tweedledum parties within neoliberalism. And a longer term perspective, even with the smaller Labour Party's representation in Parliament, may be what it takes. And if that's the case, one would hope Momentum would be a strong force for doing that.
Certainly we'll be following this election, which is just around the corner compared to American elections where there's a 2-year lead up. I thank you so much for joining us and hope you can join us for ongoing analysis as things unfold over the next 2 months.
Always good to talk to you, Sharmini. Bye.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.